Parshas Vayakail. First few psukim are about Shabbos, and the rest of the parsha is about the Mishkan. I'd like to mention one or two nekudas regarding the Mishkan, and then Baker, I wanted to talk a little about Shabbos. Very often in the parsha, in different parshas, you have a form that's repeated, and there's small shinuyim, and people will very often come over to me and ask me, why is it this way, why is it that way? I found that the Meshech Chochmah very often picks on these type of things and explains them. And one of them is in the parsha, which most of Vayakail is different sections that talk about the things they made in the Mishkan. Vayas Yiriyah season. That's how the parsha starts. Till a samach, and then Vayas Hakrashim, and then there's a pause, and Vayas Samalaya, Vayas Mizbeach, Vayas Shulchan. It always starts with Vayas Es. That's the way each of the sections starts. Vayas Es, Hashulchan, Hamalaya, etc. The exception of one, and that is by the Aron. It says Vayas B'Tzalel Es Ha'aron. Vayas so why Dafka over here does it stick in B'Tzalel's name? It's not the first, it will be the first one, you can explain, but it's not the first one. It has many before. Vayas Yiriyos, Vayas Lulais, Vayas Karsei Nechaishes, Vayas Michsas, 4, Vayas Sakrashim is 5. Vayas Brichas Eshita is 6, Vayas Sabriach Aticha is 7, Vayas Sapraichas is 8, Vayas La Arba Amud Eshita is 9, Vayas Mosach is 10. So there are 10 before, and then it's only by this one it says Vayas B'Tzalel Sa'aron. Then after that again, Vayas B'Adayas Eshitim, Vayas Kapayres, Vayas Shnei Kruvim, Vayas Shulchan, Vayas Miskeres Tefach, Vayas Sabadim, Vayas Sakelim Hashal Shulchan, Vayas Samanayra. Like 10 before and 10 after. All of them just say Vayas. Vayas B'Chakatayres is 9, Vayas Sabadim is 10, Vayas Hashem and Mishnah is 11, Vayas Zachayil is 12, Vayas Kanes of 13, Vayas Kolchan is 14, it's Vayas Michbar, Masei Reshes. It's much more. There are about 26 or 27 that are just Vayas. There are many psukim, the whole parsha. You know, the whole parsha is 120 something. So you have about 27, 28 Vayas, Vayas, Vayas. And punked by the Aron, it says Vayas B'Tzalel Es Ha'aron. So why over here does it insert B'Tzalel's name? So the Meshech Chochmah says a nice hezbollah. We know that in the Bayis Sheni, there was no Aron. In the Bayis Sheni, when the Kohen went in, the Mishnah says in Yuma, when the Kohen went in on Yom Kippur, he burnt the Ketores by the Mokim Ha'aron. But there was no Aron in the Bayis Sheni. Now in the Bayis Sheni, they didn't have many of the Kalim from the Bayis Rishon. They didn't have the Menorah, they didn't have the Mizbeach, they didn't have the Menorah. A lot of Kalim, but they made them all anew. They made them anew. Even after the Nes Chanukah, the Gemara says that the old Menorah wasn't good anymore. So they didn't have the old Menorah, they made a new Menorah. So they took 7 pipes and they put them together and they made a Menorah. First it wasn't made out of gold, they got richer, they made it out of gold. But constantly they made new kalim every time a keli, something happened to a keli, so they made a new keli. That's part of the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, is that if a keli is broken or a keli is not usable, you make a new one. The only one that they didn't make new was the Aron. The Aron, which also they didn't have, they didn't make the Aron. The Rishash over there in Yuma, that Mishnah asks, why Taka didn't they make a new Aron? To everything else they made and not the Aron. So he answers that the Aron has to be Aron Habris and has to be with the Luchais. If you don't have the Luchais, there's no purpose in making an Aron. That's what he explains. I think Rabbi Yaakov in Parshas Truma also has a piece on this. But Lamaisa comes out, it's very meduyik. So the Meshech Chochmah, everything is Vayas, because they made many times. They made curtains. These curtains don't last forever. had to look nice in the Beis HaMikdash. So they made curtains, they made krashim, they made brichim, they made many things, but these things were made again and again and again. These things were repeated. Even within the 40 years, it could be that they remade things, with one exception. The Aron was made only by Betzalel. And since it was made only by Betzalel, there was no other Aron that was made. Betzalel's Aron was made, and it lasted till Yeshua HaMelech was going as the Aron, and then there was no Aron. There was no follow-up of the Aron. So it's very nice that it's meduyik that everything is vayas, because they made over l'dairis. The Torah speaks l'dairis, except for this one thing, vayas Betzalel l'sa'aron. It's just a dogma how the Torah speaks, and their shinuyim sometimes, it says niska, nisacheha, niskayan. Everything is meduyik with a hezber. Once you hear the hezber, it's beautiful. I saw a second shot. Actually, I heard the second shot from the Sefer Livius Chaim. He says the second shot on Vayas Betzalel. It's not a theorem. He just says to look at a Rashi and you'll understand. He says look at Rashi Devarim Perek Yud Pasuk Aleph and you'll understand Vayas Betzalel. What does Rashi say there? There, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to Klal Yisrael. He says, when I came down from Har Sinai, Amar Hashem Elai, Psolocha Shnoi Savanu Karishainim, Alei Alei Hahara, Vasisolocha Arain Eitz. So Rashi there says that Moshe Rabbeinu said to himself, I'm going to bring down the Luchais, Lahechan, that name, where am I going to put them? Let me make the Aron before I go up to Har Sinai, so that when I come down, I'll have a place to put the Aron. So Moshe Rabbeinu actually made the Aron much earlier than the whole Mishkan. He made the Aron when he went up to Har Sinai. He made an Aron in which to store the Luchas. So Zok Rashi, V'loizehu Aron Shasa B'Tzalel. Shai Mishkan Lo Nisaskavoy Ad Lachi Yana Kippurim. Now you would think this is the same Aron. It says the same lashon in the pasuk that he made an Aron, and v'echtev ala luches es advar m'shayv luches rishayim asher shibarta v'samtam ba'aron v'as Aron afishitin. If you would learn it, you would assume that it's the same Aron. So Rashi says no, it's not the same Aron that Betzalel made. Betzalel made it later. So again, it's meridik meduyik vayas Betzalel es Aron. If we just say vayas es Aron, the person would think it's the same Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu made. So the pasuk is meduyik vayas Betzalel l'sar. So there's two things. The Meshech Chochmah says vayas Betzalel l'sar is lafuki the future. Then the future it was never made again, only Betzalel. And the Livius Chaim says vayas Betzalel l'sar is lafuki the past. That Moshe Rabbeinu made an Aron that was a storage Aron. That wasn't a Mishkan Aron. Here you would think it's the same Aron Moshe Rabbeinu's Aron. No, vayas Betzalel l'sar. Tell you, Betzalel made a special Aron for the Mishkan. So that's those are the two Nekudas. All right. There's one other thing I wanted to mention to you before I go to Shabbos. I ask you a riddle. You know the answer? Of all the kalim and all the parts and everything, which is the only one that it doesn't say dimensions for? It doesn't say Arkay Rachbay, it doesn't say anything. Arkay Rachbay, it's nothing. Huh? Shulchan says. No. I also had a share of 3 amas. Masid says Machleks the Gemara. I'm not going to think they call that. The only one is one of them that's not mentioned in Truma. That's the Kiyar. The Kiyar has no size. The Esses Akir and the Chayshes doesn't say anywhere a size for the Kiyar. So the Ibn Ezra in our parsha writes the reason. It says Vayas Akir and the Chayshes was Kanei the Chayshes. The Marais Hatzoivai Kashetzabu Pesach Halamai. The Kiyar was made with the copper mirrors of the women that the women used in Mitzrayim to put on makeup. And since it was so important to make it with the Marais Hatzoivai, the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted every mirror that's given, they're going to use in the Kiyar. If the women will give more, it'll be bigger. If it'll give less, it'll be smaller. But nobody should be refused. So the size of the Kiyar was not totally in the halacha. It was totally in whichever the women would decide to donate. They weren't mechuyev to donate it. Whichever women would donate the Maris HaTzayvais, that would be the size the size of the kiyah. So Rashi, I think it's a famous Rashi. Rashi says that Moshe Rabbeinu originally was reluctant to accept the Maris HaTzayvos. Rashi says, the Maris HaTzayvos were made for the women to put on makeup, to be miskashtais. So he said that's not appropriate in the Beis HaMikdash. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu kabel ki elu chavivim alay min hakoil shal yedayim emidu hanoshim tzayvos rabbis b'Mitzrayim kshahayu ba'alayim yegayim ba'avodas terach hayohalchos melichas la'maychel u'mishta achilasais la'mdek la'amarais etc. U'mishtadlasai. So Rashi says that no, it was a good thing, so therefore used it. I believe in the Magen Avraham in Simon Kuf Mem Zayin. He makes a point here that's much stronger. It's one thing, Moshe Rabbeinu was Mayis, Maris HaTzayvos, they used for Lagaris to say Yetzaharas, Hashem said no, it was for good. But there's a much stronger point. There's a halacha that Dover Shenishtamish by Hedyet is also Lagavaya. In other words, it has nothing to do with whether it's Yetzirah, Yetzirah. A person, let's say somebody has a table. The table breaks. But there's a nice, good, solid piece of wood on the table. He wants to use that now to make Atzechayim for a Sefer Torah. So the Shulchan Aruch says it's awesome. Davish Shenishtamish by Hedyet. Chayfetz that's used for a Hedyet, you don't use. For a Sefer Torah, you use. For Tashmisha Kedusha, you use new things. You don't take a davar hedyet and use it for a davar shebekdusha. So the Magen Avraham asks on that Faber that what about the Maris HaTzayvos? Maris HaTzayvos were davar shenishtamish by hedyet. It was used by regular people, and used things you're not allowed to use for the Beis HaMikdash. If it's melted down, you could, but that was the whole Beis HaMikdash. They melted things. They melted down all the jewelry. Moshe Rabbeinu was Mayis because they didn't melt it down, because they smelted it together and they made a kiyah from it. So in the back, the Eishel Avram, in the back of the Shulchan Aruch, there's a teretz, not the Pri Megadim, the Butchat Sharav, in the back of the Shulchan Aruch. Eishel Avram says that the Havana Amuka in Rashi really is that when Marais HaTzayvos are used, L'gadel, the chiba between Ish ve'Ishtai, it's not Tashmishay Hedyet, it's Tashmishay Kedusha. It wasn't Tashmishay Hedyet. It was Tashmishay Kedusha Me'ikara. Something that's used for such a purpose, it was Me'ikara Tashmishay Kedusha. So the whole kasha falls away. If you do something for your own personal, one puts on makeup because she wants people should look at her a certain way. That's but it's done for the purpose of a chibur ish ve'ishtai. And that's Tashmisha Kedusha. And that's a tremendous, it's a halacha, but it's the Bar Musa, and how the same kaiches developed, the more they could use for kaiches hatzoma, the more in the tzad hatzahira, the tzad kedusha, the more this whole idea of being megadol chiva beinish leishtai, that it's a davar shebekdusha. And Simukuf Medzayin, the back of the Shulchan Aruch. The first Eishel Avram in the back is the Pri Megadim Eishel Avram. The second Eishel Avram, in most Shulchan Aruch is printed second. That's the Butchat Sharav. All right, these are two Nakudis regarding the Mishkan. I wanted to talk a little about Shabbos. Shabbos is mentioned in Sefer Shemais an inordinate number of times. Unusual number of times that Shabbos is mentioned. It's mentioned in, of course, in Aseres HaDibros. It's mentioned before the Aseres HaDibros, the Shomnei Yisrael Shabbos. It's mentioned in Kisisa. It's mentioned in vayakail. Shabbos is mentioned, I think, 4 times in Sefer Shemais. The Shaykhis of Shabbos, I saw an interesting Nakuda. This is the Beis HaLevi in the beginning of the parasha talks a little about why it's mentioned about the centrality of Shabbos. But the idea of Shabbos belonging dafke after the Chet HaEgel is really a Gemara. The Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Ches, says that if somebody is Shomer Shabbos Kilchasa, even if he was over Avodah Zarah, Meichel Lai. So there's a Gemara that has such a makar that after the Chet HaEgel, there should be, when you talk about the Mishkan, there should be a mention of Shabbos. Besides, Rashi mentioned some drushes, but the centrality of Shabbos. There's an Imrei Emes that says that we have this Kabbalah that when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchais, the letters flew off the Luchas. He says that he brings, he can't say on his own, that all the Isis flew off the Luchas except for the Isis of Shabbos. The Isis of Shabbos remained, and that's why we mentioned in Shemona Esrei the Luchais in connection with Shabbos. These Machmai Shavnan Eskelkai, Kevin Namakrasalai. And then we mentioned the Shnei Luchas of Anahar Biyadai, the Chasbem Shir Shabbos. We mentioned Shabbos in the Luchais. You don't find that we mention any place else, I don't think, and not in Torah, not in Tefillah, that we go back to the fact that it was mentioned in the Luchais, except by Shabbos. What's the uniqueness of Shabbos? The uniqueness of Shabbos is that Shabbos started earlier. The Luchais was not the beginning of Shmir Shabbos for Klal Yisrael. First of all, Klal Yisrael was the Stav of Gemara in Shabbos. And that means that the Luchais was not the first tzivoy of Shabbos. And the truth is, Chazal say, Mizmor Shili Yom HaShabbos, that in Mitzrayim they kept Shabbos. Even when they worked for the Mitzrayim, they didn't work on Shabbos. Which means that the Egel was Paygame. Everything has its Kayach from its Haskalah. The Egel was Paygame in the Matan Torah, the original Matan Torah, and was Yored the level of all the mitzvahs. The whole concept Luchas Rishonis, Luchas Shniyas, that there was a Yerida because of the Egel, that is definitely a Yerida in all the mitzvahs. They were Parchas Bab, they got upgeschwacht. There was no longer the Isis, the writing of Hashem, it was the writing of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Luchas Shniyas. Everything went down a darga, except the Shabbos, because that was not the Haskalah of Shabbos, was not by the Luchais. Shabbos predated the Luchais as a tzivoy. It predated, and therefore the pagam that the Egel Avad, the Egel was pagam in Klal Yisrael, but that it was pagam in the Luchais was not the same pagam because of Mara. I'm glad it's Meduyik. We say in Yismach Moshe, we say Shnei Luchais Aman Har Biyadai, the Kasabem Shmir Shabbos, and we say the Chen Kasab B'Saresecha Mishamru B'nei Yisrael Shabbos. So we don't say the Chen Kasab B'Saresecha, the Shabbos that's on the Luchais. Mishamru B'nei Yisrael Shabbos is not on the Luchais, that goes back to Mara. So we say the Chen Kasab B'Saresecha Mishamru B'nei Yisrael Shabbos, we go back to the Shabbos that predates the Luchais. So the Shabbos has a unique koyach of somehow of Tikkun HaEgel, of predating the Egel. That's concept of Shabbos being a bris. What's a bris? A bris is something that's kavur v'kayim, which is solid. The question is how to bring this into a Havana, a practical Havana, but this Nakud is there. That Shabbos has a unique koyach that the Yetzaharas, that people have a Yerida from, Kol Hashem Shabbos Kol Chasa Afilu Oived Avodah Zarah, Meichel Lai, that Shabbos has some special, unique thing. You know, if many of you are in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, you know when a car goes by, the Yerushalmis all scream Shabbos Shabbos, and even if they're just muttering it to themselves, when they're in the mood to scream or throw things, but even they drive by, they say Shabbos Shabbos. The truth is that in the Chassidus Sfarim, there's a car I know in the Chakal Yitzchak and Parshas Yisrael, and in the Imrei Noyim back of Parshas Vayeshev. In those two places it says that a skula, to be protected from the hashpah of seeing chatoim on Shabbos, is to say Shabbos Shabbos. And that's where this this thing comes from. I mean, I don't know if they know it, but the whole thing comes from this idea that Shabbos is somehow an extra level of shmira. So I'd like to bring this. It's all a very luftige concept that Shabbos has these kaiches. The truth is, years ago, I asked Rav Palm. I remember asking him very seriously. I told him I'm in yeshiva. Shabbos for me is like it's a big yerida. I don't see what I'm supposed to get from Shabbos. Every day I come to yeshiva early. I learn, sometimes I make a cheshbon, this many hours, that many hours. Shabbos, between coming and going and davening and sitting in a suda. So in Shabbos there's no, because I don't feel for ben yeshiva it's hard to see exactly where the aliyah of Shabbos is supposed to come from. A whole week, you're learning, you're spending hours learning in yeshiva. And Shabbos, between this and that, people, and then there's somehow the special thing about Shabbos. I don't know if Shabbos or Cholent, but that in the afternoon you get drowsy, and so the whole morning is finished, and the whole afternoon I don't know, you ever had such a feeling? I don't know. It's like somehow I had this hergish. So Rav told me, and it didn't satisfy me really at the time. He said, look, Shabbos is also an avodah. You have to do the avodah of Shabbos. There's an avodah of sitting and learning. There's an avodah called Shabbos. You have to do the avodah of Shabbos. You have to try to get the most you could out of it. It didn't really satisfy me. So I'd like maybe to explain a little bit, based on the way I understand this concept, maybe to try to bias a little bit of what we're supposed to be getting from Shabbos and what the Uniqueness of Shabbos is. Let me start with a Dvar Halacha. There's a Chassam Sofer in the Tshuva and Siman Pei Daled. I don't say everyone's masking to the Chassam Sofer, but at least the Chassam Sofer says it. He says the Beis Meir writes it also. The Chassam Sofer has the kash. Rashi Shita is that yesh shlichus la'akom l'chomra. Even though those of you who learned the sugis of shlichus and kedushin, you know that yesh shlichus la'akom. Right? Atem gam atem b'dei bris, shluchem b'dei bris. The shluchus shalom kavaisa is only by a yid, not by a guy. But Rashi Shita is that's only l'kula. L'chomra yesh liach la'akom, yesh shlichus. If you make a shagah, yesh liach to do an aveira, yesh shlichus la'akom. That's Rashi Shita in a few places in Shas. Some Sefer, why is, if you tell a guy to do malacha on Shabbos, it's a Drabanan, it's a basic cloud that we all know. If you tell a guy to do malacha on Shabbos, it's a Drabanan, so it's mutter, shvus to shvus, b'makom mitzvah. There are certain things that are mutter. Or makom chayla, you can tell a guy to do malacha for a chayla. What do you mean? If yesh shlichus la'akom l'chumra, so why don't we say that it's a deraisa to tell a guy to do malacha for you on Shabbos? Like Rashi Shita, he's not talking about halacha. But like Rashi, that yesh lichus la'akom l'chumra, so I tell a guy to do malacha, it should be us. And it's some cipher that on Shabbos it can't be. The nekuda of Shabbos is the menuchas guf ha-Yehudi. Shabbos is not that Rebbe Shalom doesn't want malacha to be done in the world on Shabbos. No. Shabbos is a din in the menucha of the person, a din in the gavra. The person should be a person who's in a matzav of menucha. L'maisa tashayach shlichus. If my mitzvah, my guf should be b'menucha, that's Shabbos. So even if there's shlichus to a guy, I tell a guy to do malach. But my guf is b'menucha. If my guf is b'menucha, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the guy does malach. It's a lamdish malacha because he has shlichus. But that's not Shabbos. Shabbos is the menuchas ha'adam, the fact that the person should be rested. This aside, the Untitled brings to explain the famous Mukiyaitis Kasha that if Isha Mishum Chitzai, the halacha is if you light a fire, someone lights a fire, and then he dies. And after he dies, the fire destroys the field. So Ishay Mishum Chitzai, it's considered as if he did it b'chayav, and his kesef is mishubit to pay, even though if he died and then there was a chayvis, he wouldn't be mishubit. Ishay Mishum Chitzai, at the time you light it, that's when there's a chiyuv. So the Mukhiyais, if it's a kasha, if Isha Mishum Chitza, it goes according to if the hemshach, whatever happens afterwards, considered you still did it. So how are you allowed to light candles for Shabbos? If a person lights the candles, when the candle is burning weiter, it's like he's burning it. Just like if a person lights a fire and he dies, but it burns later, it's still considered he's burning it, even though he's dead. We consider Ki'ilu he's burning it. So why by a fire on Shabbos? How could you light candles on Shabbos? If you hold Isha Mishum Chitza, it's a hemshach. He's still considered to be doing it later. So if this title, some Seifes Yisayid is that a lamdisha malacha is not a malacha. It's all in the menucha of the guf ha-Yehudi. The Yid's guf has to be b'menucha on Shabbos. That's the mitzvah. The menucha of the person. So if the menucha of the person is a mitzvah, so even in lamdis he's doing a malacha, it doesn't matter. So Kahena Rabbis there are many such things. The Egleital has a piece about doing a shinoi on Shabbos. You know that if you do malacha b'shinoi, it's not a malacha. So the Egleital says by other dinim, a shinoi has to be a shinoi in the nifal. It has to be a shinoi in the result. If you write with your left hand and you're a righty, there's a shinoi in the result. It doesn't look the same. So if a righty writes a Sefer Torah with his left hand, it's a shinoi and it's a proper Sefer Torah. It's not considered a ksiva. It's a shinoi in the nifal. On Shabbos, if you do a shinoi in the Maisa, which is not a shinoi in the nifal, the person carries, he puts something under his arms, and he carries out. The malacha is oiskatan the same way. The nifal, that the thing came from Shliach Theorem, is the same. It's still considered to be a shinoi. Why is it different than Kol HaTorah Kula? Everywhere else you need a shinoi in the result. Will come out everywhere else. Shabbos not. So Gleital says the same rule. Shabbos is a din in the menuchas haguf. It's not a din in the result. It's not the result that matters. It's the Maisa. If you do a Maisa Malacha with a Shinoi, so it's not the Maisa Malacha. For Kahena, a Grama on Shabbos is Potter. Why is a Grama Potter? The Malacha got done. There are other deraises. If someone kills somebody through a Grama, it's an Issa deraisa. So why is it any different? No Mazik through a Grama. Some hold this Issa deraisa as well. The Paskin Issa deraisa. The teretz is that Shabbos is different. If you mazik someone, Aver is the result. If you kill someone, the Aver is the result. Shabbos is not the result. It's not that malach is done. It's that the guf ha'adam should be b'menucha. The nekuda of Shabbos is menuchas ha'adam. This yisayid, that the yisayid of Shabbos is menuchas ha'adam. Right? It says, it's not true that Hashem created for 6 days. Hashem created for 7 days. Shabbos is not a davar shluli. It's not that you just don't do malacha. It's that a person has to come to a matziv of menucha. There's a certain matziv of menuchas hanefesh, which is the avodah of Shabbos. I believe it's in the Argad Al Yahu. He has a piece called Luchas Rishaynos, Luchas Shniyas. And he says the Luchas Rishaynos and Luchas Shniyas had a different lashon in a number of places. One of them was the Shabbos. The Luchas Rishaynos said that Luchas Rishaynos is Zachas Yom HaShabbos L'Kachay, and the Luchas Shniyas said Shamar is Yom HaShabbos. So Rav Shua is Masber the Chilik. Zachar Yom HaShabbos L'Kachay, and Luchas Rishaynos. Luchas Shniyas, which is printed in Veskanan, is Shamar. He says to come to a batzav of menucha, there's the darga of Luchas Rishaynos and darga of Luchas Shniyas. The lower darga, which is Luchas Shniyas, is Shamar. Just don't do malacha. You're not doing malacha. It's also a certain matzav of menucha. It's a shlumistic matzav of menucha. It's a matzav of menucha by not doing malacha. The Luchas Rishaynos are zachar, to have a ha'ara, to have a positive hergish of menucha. For the aliyah, the avodah of Shabbos, is not the shlulistika. The fact that you're not doing malacha, so b'meila you're b'menucha. You work all week, so Shabbos you don't go to work, so b'meila you're more rested. The darga of Shabbos is the aura of Shabbos. To have a hergish, a positive hergish, ma'olam chaser Shabbos. That Shabbos is something which is a positive thing. When the Imrei Emes says this vart that the oisius of Shabbos didn't fly off the luchas rishaynos, what he's saying is that menucha of Shabbos, the ha'ara of Shabbos, the hergish of Shabbos, the feeling of menucha Shabbos, of what's menucha Shabbos, the feeling of being freed from the daigas hachayil, like Rashi says, yu kilu kol melechtacha asuya, no hergish of missing anything. That positive menucha that's still there, and that's something a person still has to try to be able to tap into. The positive sense of the ruchnius of Shabbos. That sense is the avodah of Shabbos. I suspect the Imrei Emes is made to match the Chedush Yerim. Chedush Yerim says on the pasuk for Isa es achayrai uponai lo yero. By the luchas shniyos, Reisa Achayrai. Achayrai is the lower level of serving Hashem. Upanai, seeing Kaviyachal, the face, the horror of Hashem, lo yero. So the Imrei Emes writes, and the Chedush Yerim writes, there's something the Gemara calls psukim she'ein lan hechra. Certain psukim are structured that you can put the comma in different places. Kavada, Pashup Shad, for Reisa Achayrai, Upanai lo yero. But the way it can be structured by changing the comma is B'ra'isa es achayrai ve'es panai comma. That Gemara darshans a few places such a manner of darshaning. The Gemara says psukim hashem lam hechra. B'ra'isa es achayrai ve'es panai. The avodah of Shabbos is to be able to have a certain positive sense of menucha. The idea of the avodah of Shabbos is for a person to come to that hergish of ruchni on Shabbos, a positive ruchnistic hergish, which is not just because not doing. It seems to me that sleeping on Shabbos, as beautiful and wonderful as it is a big waste. It always strikes me that we talk about Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol Yamim, and then people spend 12 out of 24 hours sleeping. Like you'd think, if Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol Yamim, so Shabbos should be the day that you don't sleep. Yom Zeh Mechubad Mikol Yamim. But somehow we spend that. I'm not sure why. Shina b'Shabbos Tainik. It seems to be part of reaching the level of menucha. I'm not sure exactly how. It's connected. But this idea of Shabbos trying to tap in to some positive hergish, it's a difficult avodah. It's avodah of luchas rishaynos. And yet, we talk about there being a sense of avodah of Shabbos, of a hergish of Shabbos, of a feeling of Shabbos. I think that this is what we're looking for. In practical terms, what I think it means is that on Shabbos, what a person does from himself. Shabbos doesn't have the structure that the weekdays have. It doesn't have the structure. It has something where a person is sort of a free agent. Shabbos, a person has his own, he's with himself. He's in contact with himself, what he wants to do. And when a person gives of himself, the hergish of Kedusha is there more than when a person just is in a flow. The idea of on Shabbos being able to take of yourself and make, whether it's Theorem or whether it's Chesed, there's a lot of Chesed could be done on Shabbos. There are a lot, I imagine that all of you, if you think enough about it, will find that there are older people in your area that you could stop into on a Shabbos and say good Shabbos to. The people have a surgery and after davening to stop into them. I think that there's a lot that could be done that we don't do. That during the week it's not there. During the week we have all kinds of shibudim. The Shabbos, we don't have the shibudim. It's not, if a person on his way home from shul on Shabbos stops for 10 minutes somewhere, I don't believe that it would be a very big change in his Shabbos schedule. I don't think he'll eat less, he'll sleep much less. 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there on Shabbos doesn't change much. I think everybody has something where a person could do these things. A person could stop in. By older neighbors, by people that had a surgery. You stop in. People are ashamed to step in. The truth is, it's a funny thing. It gives people a very big chizik. People who have a tzara or are homebound, it's unbelievable what kind of chizik it gives people. I've had over the years a number of older neighbors, and I've stepped in. I made it my practice to step in, sometimes Friday night, some Shabbos by day. I don't like to do it religiously the same time, because then if you miss 1 week, but just to make my business to step in. Those of you who come to my house, you see we have a few paintings on the wall. There's one painting which came to us once with a package, with a letter from a woman in Florida. She claims it's worth $1,000. I told my wife, why don't you just tell her to send $1,000? It wouldn't cost so much postage. But she sent it to us because she had parents that lived next door to us. And she remembers that I was the one that always used to step in. The truth is, I don't remember even stepping in that much. I used to step in. I used to cuddle with my little kids at the time on the way home. And I mean, she's not even the one that was there. She heard from her parents that I step in. And then this goes back to before, Rabbi Reisman gave the Navi shir. I was just, a younger man in the neighborhood. It wasn't like because I get my name in the paper once in a while, that's why they felt good. I was just, I was in Koil 3, 4, 5 years. He was my neighbor maybe for 3, 4 years, and then he passed away. He was an older yid. Got a very interesting person. We had stories to tell from tells in Europe yet. But there's a lot you can do on Shabbos, and that touches on the Aura Shabbos. It gives a person a different heritage. It's quality time. It's a small amount of time. You make something happen with it. I remember for years, between Mincha and Marav on Shabbos, I used to learn Pirkei Avos with Rashi and the Yain and the Rambam, the way it's printed in the back of the Gemaras. I remember a certain shmak that I got from it, which it was Ein Adayva to a weekday learning. It was just a certain geschmack that I got. That's the Or HaShabbos. That's a certain sense of Kedushas HaShabbos. Vayakail-pekudei Shabbos is not just a day to not do. It's a day to do. That sense of Kedushas Shabbos is why Shabbos is here. After the Egel, the Mishkan was made to be mechaper on the Egel. And there, Shabbos is mentioned. Because Shabbos is what remains from the Luchas Rishainis. What remains from the Luchas Rishainis is this Or. This potential hour that a person could tap into on Shabbos, and it seems that it's kedai not to have a schedule with a first seder and a second seder, and the whole schedule of the derech hayeshivas is kedai just to be able to tap into that or HaShabbos, that kedushas HaShabbos. I think we have to try to take a certain sense, a certain feeling of where we could be Mekadesh. When you take something to Shabbos, it's from yourself. You're not doing it because everyone else is doing it. Take from yourself something more to do with the Shabbos, something to make a better schedule on Shabbos, and to have something that lets you tap in a little more to Kedusha Shabbos. So this is the heritage here of the mentioning of Shabbos, the constant mentioning of Shabbos. And with that, I say good Shabbos.
Medrash on Parshas Pekudei that says that when Moshe Rabbeinu finished the whole asik of Parshas vayakail-pekudei, he gave Klal Yisrael an accounting. He gave them a cheshbon of how much money came in, how many shkolim came in, how much was needed for each of the kalim, how much was needed for the hooks, how much was needed for the adonim, how much was needed for the reisman. And he made an accounting with them to show that every penny that came in was used honestly, and that none of it, Moshe Rabbeinu took none of it for himself. Straight and even accounting. And as I'll say, that the Medrash said that from here we learn that a person has an obligation, let's say today have riyas. person has an obligation to remove all chashad when he does things that people shouldn't be chayshid him, even if it's anybody, even if he didn't do anything wrong. Shememar v'yisam nikiyim me'Hashem u'miyisrael. The chiyuv to be naki v'yisam nikiyim me'Hashem u'miyisrael, that not only do you have to be honest, in front of Hashem, Hashem knows everything, He knows that you're honest. It's not enough. You have to be naki from other people too. You have to be naki, that not to leave room for people to be chayshid. The truth is that it's neged hasvara. This chiyuv is ksaf neged hasvara. What are we talking about? We're talking about somebody who voluntarily gave kaichis to do something. You have a group of millions of people, and here you have someone who went and he undertook to do. He undertook to be the person that does. So what would happen between any group of people here in Flatbush? They have to do something, and one person undertakes. He's gonna be Isaac in it. He's not paid for it. He's doing all volunteer work, and he undertakes to raise the money and to do it. So on top of that, it's not enough that he takes all the aggravation for people, and he goes and runs around and gets the money, and he runs around and gets the people to build, and he makes sure it's done. He coordinates the work. And on top of that, you're telling him that he has to give an accounting, that no one should be chayshid him. It's really not the instinct of the svara that a person would have to give an accounting. Who has to give an accounting? I know that Kodesh Baruch Hu knows that I'm straight. I have to give an accounting. So Afal Pikei, Moshe Rabbeinu gave an accounting. He said, "Nikim Hashem Yisroel." It's such a concept that a person has to be a naki, not leave room for chashad. Rav Pam always used to quote the Mishnah in Shkalim, the Mishnah in the Perek Gimel of Shkalim. It says when they collected the Shkalim in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and they did Shumas Halishcha, a kohen went in with a box and he took out boxes of coins. He went in with begadim that didn't have hems on them. No one should be chayshim. He stuck a coin in the hem of the beged. He didn't wear his tefillin. They wore tefillin all day. When they'll go into the room with the money with his tefillin on, maybe someone will be chayshim that he opened his tefillin and stuck a coin inside the tefillin and closed it, and he went out to hiding the coin. So he didn't wear his tefillin. And it doesn't say in the Mishnah, but Yerushalmi says that they talked with him when he came out to show everyone they doesn't have. Maybe he's hiding coins in his mouth. So they talked with him that he should show that his mouth was clean, that he didn't have anything in his mouth. They were chayshim. The Gemara says Shema Ya'ashir, because if he'll become rich, they'll say Mitrumas Halishcha and Heshir. He got rich from Trumas Halishcha. Or maybe Shema Ya'ani, maybe he'll become poor. If he becomes poor, people are going to say, aha, he stole from the Trumas Halishcha, so Kodesh Baruch Hu is punishing him and he's poor. That's what people are. Whatever happens, the chayshim, right? Becomes rich from the money. Becomes poor from the money. So, for such people that are going to say such things, the Yisam Nikiyah Mi Hashem Yisrael, and the Taisis Yantif there in the Mishnah Shkalim brings from the Lashon Yerushalmi, Ezel Chomer Mekulam, the Yisam Nikiyah. One of the most difficult things is to be Yetzi Yedei Habriyas. Because we're not talking about being Yetzi Yedei Habriyas, the Chafetz Chaim shouldn't be chayshim. We're talking about ordinary people. And a person should stay clear of chashad. When he's doing a good thing, he didn't do anything wrong. Afal Pikei, he should stay clear of a chashad that nobody should be chayshim. And that chiyuv is a very difficult chiyuv. There's a very interesting tshuva that's on Sefer in Chevet Vav, tshuva Nun Tes. It's missing part of the story because he's writing to a Talmud and he's berating the Talmud. He's giving him musar. It's not clear what the story was, but it's clear. He's telling the Talmud that what you did, whatever it was a good thing, but you failed because you were not careful to be naki from chashad, and people are going to be chayshid you. Most people, if it happened to you and you did a good thing, and people are chayshid you would tell yourself, look, I know I did the right thing. So people are chayshid me, so what am I going to do? It's all part of being like that people are chayshid. So Sefer berates him. He says you should have been more careful. His lashon is Kol Yamai Ha'isi Mitzvah Al Mikra Zeh the Yisam Nikim Hashem Am Yisrael. So Sefer writes, my whole life I was inspired that this pasuk I shouldn't be over on, V'yisem Nikiyin. And he writes a Peladikazay. Yoiser Efshal Lotzei Sidei Shemai. It's easier to satisfy HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lotzei Sidei Shemayim, Yoiser Efshal Lotzei Sidei Shemayim, Yoiser Harbe. It's much easier, Lotzei Sidei Abrius, than to satisfy people. People are tough to satisfy. V'ain shayoiser kasha ma'id ma'id ad la'ein mispar. V'misha eina yotzi yedei shemayim. Chas v'shalom. Now you're saying somebody does Aveira, it's bad. Someone who doesn't do the Aveira, but he needs a mocking for people to be chayshim that he did the Aveira, that's worse. It doesn't tell him. As a person does the Aveira, but nobody knows, that's better than someone who didn't do the Aveira, but he was negligent, he left a mocking for people to be chayshim. He says it's worse. Yoiser harbe, it's much worse. Kasha ma'id ma'id ad la'ein mispar. Tell it. So Sefer writes that Pshat Shlomo HaMelech said, "Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh Tova Vayachta." And Shlomo HaMelech said that nobody could get away without doing Averos. So if I say that some Sefer is valid, well, it's possible. No, you can do no Averos. So no Pshat in the pasuk is that Ein Adam Tzadik Ba'aretz Asher Ya'aseh Tova Vayachta means to be a tzaddik and no one should be chayshid you. That's impossible. That could be a tzaddik. But he won't be over on the Yisem Nikiyin. That's very, very hard. And he writes that there's very stark Lash in the whole Tshuva. And he writes that the Aveira of the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, the Gad and Bnei Ruvain, when they asked for a vayakail-pekudei v'ayardin, the kavanah was good. After they explained themselves, Moshe Rabbeinu was nasty. But initially, when they asked, there was a cheshai on them. So the Sam Sefer, when the 10 Shvatim went to Galus, the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain went first. They went to Galus earlier than the rest of the Shvatim. Why? He says, even though, how can we talk about the Kedoshim, what they did wrong, but Lamaisa, at the Torah was Megalata, they were over on this. They left the market to be chashudim. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu was chashudim. He says that's why they went to Galus first. So it's a new chiyuv. Yisem Nikiyin, Shem Yisrael. It's a new chiyuv. It's a very difficult chiyuv really to be Yosef and Ganti. Today, I don't know if it was always this way, but there are people who are always looking to find chesronos in other people. That's the way it is. And I felt you would think, like I said, I think this is Keneged the Svara. You would think, if I'm doing what's right, so what do I have to worry about what people say? But it seems that it's not that way. It strikes me very much that people are ashamed if they're stuck in the middle of Manhattan and it's late, they have to daven mincha, so they have to pull over and daven on the side of the street. So they're ashamed to daven in the middle of Manhattan on the side to daven. Or some people on the airplane, they're shy to daven on the airplane. I don't know, like when I was in Florida, I davened Shachris on the airplane on the way back. Made a cheshbon of a seekin. Davened. On the way there, my host drove me. He said, "You put on a towel in the airplane?" No. He told me, "At least just play a pillow without your towel." There you go. I don't see that what is to be ashamed of. Now, to walk in by Ashrei, Ashrei won't see it. To walk in by Ashrei, that I see what's to be ashamed of. I don't know how people. How can someone walk into shul? Yes, the Baruch Shalom. I think a guy would be ashamed to walk in. A guy comes in, we know that he has a good reason, maybe. But I think a guy would be ashamed. He misses brachas even. A person misses brachas, I think he'd be ashamed to walk in late. Should feel bad. So that I can see a person should be ashamed. But to daven, to pull over on the side of the highway and daven, a person has to be ashamed. It's a little twisted, the whole system. Yisem Nikiyin Hashem Yisrael means even though you have a good reason, a person has to avoid chashad. A person shouldn't do things when people are chayshing him. And it's not a small thing, it's a big thing. For a person to do things when people are chayshing him, especially, they tell you out where there are a lot of people out there who are looking to be megareya b'nei Torah. not a double pashas. Yisem Nikim Hashem Yisrael, you have to be careful. Now, I'd say kach until how many mishugan do you have to worry about that they're going to be choshesh? People are always going to find that's right. I don't know, but at least there has to be some awareness. That there has to be a person who has to have a certain stolz, a certain pride. That from Kaidinyan, he in front of other people, and he's careful. You shouldn't think, the hypocrite. In front of other people, I have to be so careful. Adrabah, it's a mitzvah in itself. The Yisem Nikim Hashem Yisrael. That person has to be careful. And I don't know, some places say it's impossible to be able to tell them something. This is a tremendous chiddush. This is the Yisem Nikim. Tremendous chiddush. The whole chiyuv is a tremendous chiyuv. It sounds like a zikr adin. I don't know what hechman bar megim. Everybody who's involved in any tzedakah, you have to publish how much money you took in, how much money you gave out. I don't know until how much it goes. My sure I know show the whole Klal Yisrael. If somebody runs the tzedakah, what do you have to do? You have to show exactly a copy of every check you got in and every check you got out. I don't know how far it goes, but certainly there has to be a sensitivity when people do things that look like they're not right. There has to be a certain sensitivity that you're thinking. This is the concept that the Medrash learns from this parasha, from Moshe Rabbeinu's Teshbainis, and it's a very difficult chiyuv to be Yisra, but it's something. Truth is, it requires a certain shtolz, a certain pride. You have to have a certain pride to do things the right way. It's usually very hard to be Yisra to everybody. But you have a certain circle around you, people closer to you, people more distant, people you don't know. At least the people closer to you, the people around you, that you should leave room for cheshad, at least that much. These are things that you do. Right, there was a halacha in, not that Yisem Nikim is not a halacha, but it's more a heritage than a halacha. There's a halacha in I wanted to talk about. It has to do with mathematics, which some of you are still involved in, and some of you, I think, you think that when you finish school, you're finished. You're not finished. It's Hashem, you do homework with the kids, you'll see. And then they have the new math, which I have no clue what half the words mean. I can figure out the answer to the problem, but I can't do it the way they want them to do it in the book. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But there's a Dibris Moshe in Gittin. In the third paragraph of Gittin, it's Ha'ara Samach Gimel. It's a very big aside in the mathematics of Shas, and our parasha has to do with Cheshbainis. I figured it would be a good time to talk about it and to mention to you some of the, at least the aside. Rav Moshe has a very big aside, which granted Rav Moshe is not the only one who writes it. There's a tshuva from Shlomo the Dayan of Vilna. Not that tshuva, it's in the back of Erev in the Cheshik Shlomo, Shlomo the Dayan of Vilna, and that's Gibel. So the same aside, it's a very nice, important aside in the mathematics of Shabbos. Right, the Gemara says that it's actually a Mishnah in Erev in Daf Gimel Amud Beis, that when you have a circle, you want to measure the diameter of the circle as compared to the circumference of the circle. So kol sheyesh v'hekefay gimel tfachim yesh v'ay reichet tefach. Anytime you want to know what the diameter of a circle is, if you measure around, for every 3 feet that the circumference is, or 3 inches of circumference is, the diameter is 1. So it's a ratio of 1 to 3. That's what it says in the Mishnah. Now we know what's the ratio of the diameter to the circumference is pi, right? Is pi. When I was in school, they called it 2 pi r. Now I think they just do pi times the diameter, which makes sense. But what? No, that's pi r squared. The 2 pi r means the diameter times pi. Pi is roughly 3.14, and so that the Gemara's estimate is actually off. It's off by 0.14. So that the cloud Choshesh vayakail-pekudei Gimel, the yesh by reichet tefach is not entirely accurate. Taisus says the kash. Taisus Erev on Daf Yudal, the Mishnah Zayid Gimel. Taisus on Daf Yudal, Taisus here hacheshbon ain't in the dupdik. It's not an exact cheshbon, and it's a kash because it's not medupdik the wrong way. So kula there, that's a kash. there's a Chubas HaRush, a letter from the Rush to the Rashba. The Rush asks another kasha on the same Gemara. Gemara says, Kol sheyesh vayakail gimel tzvach, yesh vayakail tefa, benani mili. The Gemara says, how do you know that if it has a circumference is 3, the diameter is 1? So the Gemara says, we learn out of a pasuk by the Yam Shel Shloim. Shloim HaMelech made a very big Yam, a very big mikvah, and it was round, the top was round, and the pasuk says that it was Eser Amma Mispasai El Spasai. It was 10 amis the diameter, and the kav Shloishim Amma Savit, and the circumference was 30. So the Gemara says Manani Mili. So the Gemara says 30 around, and it was 10 down the middle. So we know it's 1 to 3, the proportion. So the Rosh wrote a letter to the Rashba. He asked him, what's Pshat the Gemara Manani Mili? If you have something which is a din, it's the kasha Manani Mili. Where do I learn it? Let's track the Rosh. They know right. You can look with our eyes and see. Right? What do you mean Manani Mili? You look with your eyes. Take a measuring tool and you measure, and you'll see. This is the shah where the Rosh is the Rashba. The Rosh's letter to the Rashba is printed in the Chubas HaRush. But as far as I know, we don't have the Rashba's letter back. We don't have the Rashba's tshuva, how he answers this kasha. So Rav Moshe takes these two kashas, the kasha of Taisvis, the cheshbon Zamaduktik, and the kasha of Taisvis of the Rosh. What do you need a pasuk for? Rav Moshe and Rav Shlomo Dayan Vilna, they answer one kasha with the other. They say that Avada the cheshbon Zamaduktik. That's why we need a pasuk. The pasuk is megalatas. The pasuk is not meduktik. The pasuk says the spasei al spasei was 10 amis, and Slavim is 30 amis. And it's not so. If his spasei was 10 in diameter, then around and around would have been 31.4 amis. So Adarab, the pasuk is megalatas that even l'kula you're not mechuyev to be medagdeg by that difference, the difference of 0.14. You're not mechuyev to be medagdeg in the calculations, and it's allowed to be off by that amount. That's what Rav Moshe writes in the Yisroel, that in the mathematical cheshbon you're allowed to be off, and he learns that it's a klal in a minute to other halachas that require mathematical cheshbon. You're allowed to be off by roughly this proportion of 0.14 to the 3. There's a beautiful, I don't know where it's printed, but it's set off in the name of the Torah, beautiful record. Because the pasuk says the kav shloishim amma savit. The pasuk is not evidence. The pasuk says it was 30 amas around. It's not a dodig. On the word kav, the kri is kav, kuf vav. The ksiv, if you look at the ksiv in the pasuk, it's kuf vav hey. Kuf vav is 106. Kuf vav hey is 111. The Gra says that 106 over 111, that discrepancy between 106 and 111, is roughly the discrepancy between 3 and 3.14. The pasuk is being meramis to the fact that this small amount of discrepancy doesn't matter. You know, it was a kav, it was really kav with a hay, but for our purposes we can read it kav without the hay, because it's not even didactic with the hay off. That's what the Gra says. So where does this come halacha l'maisa? Obviously in the sukkah would come. We're measuring the sukkah, but who makes the sukkah the minimum size today? Nobody makes it. And even if you do, you don't make a round sukkah, you get a cardboard box or something. Who makes a round sukkah? But it comes up in the tefillin measuring the ribuah of the tefillin. As you know, tefillin have to be square, and the question is how exact the square of the tefillin is. Tefillin, it's not plastic that you make it with a mold in a machine. It's made out of leather. The leather has to be compressed. It's not an exact science. It's done usually by hand with a press. It's done by hand. And the precision of the ribuah is sometimes difficult. How exact does ribuah have to be? So here we have a second mathematical calculation, and that is kol amsa b'ribuah amsa v'trechum shah ba'alach sayda. Gemara says that when you have a square and you want to get the diagonal of the square, the diagonal of the diagonal. So when you have a square, let's say each side is 1, 1, 1, and 1. The diagonal, which is across the two corners, is how much? Pythagoras theorem is 1 squared plus 1 squared equals the diagonal, which is the square root of 2. Okay? You take the two sides. If you make a triangle. When you cut a diagonal, you cut a square down the middle, you have a triangle. Any right triangle, the diagonal is, it's not a complicated thing. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, which means the diagonal, which is the longest, you take the two sides, you square them. If it's a square, so it's 1, 1. So 1 squared is 1, plus 1 squared is 1, equals c squared. It means the middle is the equal of 2, the square root of 2, which is 1.4114, the way it says in the books. 1.41414, the way it says in the math books, which is also like dictical. It's just easier to write it that way. But that's what you learn when you memorize the regions. If you ever did that, you memorize square root of 2 is 1.41414, and it keeps on going. Right, if it's 2, whatever it is, the two sides are 2 each, so it's 2 squared and 2 squared, which is 4 and 4 is 8, so the diagonal is the square root of a. That's the way it works. The Gemara says, Kol amsa b'ribua amsa b'trechumsa v'alafsayim. The Gemara says that for any amma on the side of the square, the diagonal is 1.4. And it stops at 1.4. It doesn't say 1.41414. Just says 1.4. It stops. It's low dark. So Ramosha again writes, this time Ramosha is in the Chuvas, Yeradei Chelik Bey, is the Chuva Kufna Vav. Rather, he mentions that a number of Chuvas, it's just the one I found. That it's also not Medugdik, it's also off a little bit, because it says 1.4, and it's really 1.414. So it's not Medugdik. And Ramosha says the same thing, that we learned the insight out of the Yamshel Shleima, that you don't have to be Medugdik exactly, and you can be off by a certain amount. How much could you be off? So Rav Moshe doesn't write in the Tshuva, but we heard from him at the Shmua up to 2%. He has to cipher how much could the square be off. I'll tell you, Rav Moshe's sheet is 2%. So I took out a pen, I tried to figure out how did Rav Moshe get 2%. So if you take a square, you take fill-in, and it's on one side it's one whatever, for every 1 inch, for every 1, and the other side is 0.98, which is off by 2%. So 1 and 0.98 will give you 1 and 0.98. You do 1 squared or 0.98 squared, you get that equals 1.96, and the square root of 1.96 is 1.4. So it's very much medugdik that if you're off by 2% on the square, you get a diagonal of 1.4, which is probably where Ramoshe's Shita comes from. That you can be off by up to 2%. Ramoshe writes, he heard B'Shem the Brisker Rav, that you have to measure it with a magnifying glass, it should be exact. And he's Matzmiyad, the Brisker Rav never said it. It's funny, he mentions it in 2 or 3 chuvas, that they told him B'Shem the Brisker Rav that you have to do it, and the language there, the English isn't so good. He writes that the Brisker Rav said you have to do it with a microscope. I don't know what that means, but how do you measure it with a microscope? I think we just meant the Brisker Rav. The Brisker Chumras, he meant it has to be exact. So Rav Moshe said it doesn't have to be exact. It has to be nira la'ayin. It has to look square to the eye. That's in the Truly he writes nira la'ayin. And I once took fill-in one of the jet boys that was staying. Maybe he had fill-in. They were not the best shape. I took them to Rav Moshe Dik, Al Shalom. He took the fill-in. He held it at arm's length. He looked at it like this. He said, "So good. Looks square to me." He didn't look at it close up, he held it arm's length. He used to check esrogim that way too. For a mark of the esrog, he held it arm's length, and turned this way that way, he said it's good. I never heard him say it's not good. It's not good, but the big had a line. Big ones. So they were lined up showing him esrogim, so he was a very sharp person. They lined up and they showed me esrogim, and a pasla esrog I didn't see yet. And to show me dollars, nobody ever shows me. And a kosher dollar, b'chnach nishkazei. But anyway, this yisai that you could be off by up to 2% is Ramoshe's yisai the Piashvua. The Sefer he writes near like 9. But and again, this comes from the Zersa. The Taisus Kasha and the Rosh's Kasha answer each other. Why do you need a pasuk for? That's not the Dugdik. That's why you need a pasuk in Tanakh. In Hilchos Eruvin, in the Aruch HaShulchan, in Tzibur Samach Gimel, he talks also when you make a rubei tfumin, when you plot a rubei tfumin, he writes the same thing. He writes you could go with the Gemara's method of calculation, even in circumstances where it comes out of kulas, because part of the Zeres HaKosov, he seems to be saying where Moshe's Yisai, and the same idea, that's all part of the Zeres HaKosov that you could be off. Now this idea would answer a number of Gemaras. One Gemara that comes to mind, in Menachos Adaf Chav Testament Aleph, the Gemara said they measured the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash a certain time, and it was Yisera, it was too much for dinner zav, it was too much, way too much. The menorah is very hard to make exact, because it has to be made in one piece, which you get chisel it out. And to make it exact, the Hashbainis are hard. The Gemara says it wasn't exact. The Gemara seems to say that it went for 200 years not exact until they realized that it wasn't exact. It's a double a little bit that for so many years they had it imprecise. But again, if we're going to learn like Rav Moshe says that there's no the chiyuv, whenever the Torah is mechayev, a mathematical cheshbon, it doesn't have to be precise exactly. It has to be to within a certain margin of error. Then Vaita is good. Another Gemara which Mistam is good, Gemara Megillah Chav Tes, says that Ravuah, it has to be square. Gemara uses an expression, it has to be square. Lahem u'balach sayman. The sides have to be square, and the diagonal. So all sides have to be the same. And the two diagonals have to be the same. Lahem u'balach sayman. So as Mepharshim asks, it's extra lush. The sides are exact, so the alachs is exact. I mean, assuming it's square, if it's square, the sides are exact, then the two diagonals will be exact. So again, it could be that it's allowed to be off up to a certain amount. So that amount has to be Bahem Balach Sayman, the amount we allow. If it's Bahem, it'll give you one amount of leeway. Balach Sayman will give you more. So these are two of the mathematical calculations of Shas. The way of measuring the diameter of a circle, and the way of measuring the diagonal of a square, which are imprecise, and the kavod. Of course, to mention mathematical cheshbainis without going to the most famous one is Tzlach's famous tumult over the shiurim of Kezesim that we have today. Tzlach turned over the whole world. The shiurim of Kezesim. There was once a certain Rav who once gave a shiur before Pesach. He said, Kazayas, the yeshiva boys have different Kezesim. I'll tell you, Chiddush, Kazayas is an aleph. See an aleph? That's a Kazayas. Sounds like he's saying such a double passion that. Right? Someone told me I wasn't at the drasha. Someone told me that this was a big chachma that this Rav said. I told him it's not emes. Tzlach did an experiment. A number of years ago I did it in the shul also on a Sunday morning. With Tzlach, the Gemara gives two ways of measuring a revius or a kazayas. The Gemara says that the shir of challah is 43 bayim and a shlish, 43 and a third eggs. That value of that 43 and a third eggs would take up the shir of a shir challah. And that's brought down the halach. The Ramah says Shavu, and the Ramah shows that it's 10 etzbais by 10 etzbais by 3 and a 9th etzbais. Based on the shir of a mikvah. It says 10 etzbais by 10 etzbais by 3 and a 9th. So there are two ways of measuring 43, the shir challah. There's what we call the finger method, which is 10 by 10 by 3 and a 9th etzbais. And there's the egg method, 43 and a third egg. So the Tzlach writes that he tried both. He experimented. He did both. First, he measured using, actually when it says etzba, it means the rest of Agaidol there. Agaidol Shoyad, the width of the thumb. So he said he did it with the finger method. And then he did it with the olive method, with the Mem Gimel Beim, with the egg method. And it's not the same. He says it came out, it's almost half. The egg method is a half of what the finger method is. You don't know what to do. What's the share of challah? You look, Rebecca writes, what's the share of challah? somewhere between 2.5 pounds and 5 pounds. So how does a banking get 2.5 pounds to 5 pounds of flour? They make a bracha. That's why, because it's very confusing. If you measure with the egg method, you get around 2.5 pounds. If you go with the finger method, you get somewhere closer to 5 pounds. So the Tzlach says we have two choices. Either this Gadlu has slice, either in the time of the Gemara to our days, the fingers got bigger, or this Kaplu Adei, where the eggs got smaller. So how do you figure out which one happened? The fingers change or did the eggs change? Well, they both change a little bit. So he says it can't be the fingers change, because the Gemara says the height of a person is 3 amas, which is whatever Yehovah is, still roughly what it is today. So we see that human beings didn't change. Must be that the eggs changed. So therefore he says, when we say 43 eggs, it could be we need today 86 eggs in order to get the volume of a sheer challah. When we say kazayas, we take our olive. It's not an olive, it's 2 olives. The Steipler has a sefer Shiurim Shel Torah. He has a beautiful bekiyas. He shows from Shach that it's true that things changed. For example, it says in the Gemara, an olive is half the size of an egg. When you look today at an olive, it's half the volume of an egg. Not yet. Not even a third, maybe a quarter. That's a typical olive, a typical egg. The olive is not half the volume of an egg. So obviously, things changed, and he brings a whole list of sugyas and shas that mention different things whose size change. It's interesting. One of the things I think has to do with the insects, the bugs in those days. If you squash the bug, you got blood, it's share of a grit. So he says, we don't have such things. Although in Israel, they're pretty close. But he has a whole big bekiyas about different things mentioned in the Gemara that changed. And from the Tzlach comes out a tremendous problem. That the whole shiur business, where we have a big problem. So the Bir Halacha has a bit of an arichas on it. The Bir Halacha says it's zicha true what the Tzlach writes, that it changed, but the Tzlach says it changed to half. He doesn't find that it's a half, maybe it's a third. In other words, not double. Maybe it's a third again as much. And the Chaim writes, but the writes is to be machmir, and the shiurim should be more by either half again or a third again, besides the way it comes out with the kedesim and the kedeim. And he says you have to do it differently. If you see from Rav Moshe, print a Rav Moshe shear of a Revius, the original measuring that Rav Moshe did was 3.3 ounces as a Revius, and for Deraisa is 4.4. Because he was machmir that the size has changed a third, like it says in the Bir Halacha. So it's 3.3, by the right, you have to add another third, so we made it 4.4. So this, the Bracha Achrona probably also, it's a little confusing. By the Seder, the way it's printed, B'Shem Rav Moshe didn't write it, is that by the first kais, you have to be machmir 4.4, Kiddush. And the other kais, you can be makel 3.3, because Arba kaisis is a Draban. It's really, you should l'chayr not that way. Because the fourth kais, we make an ala gefen on. So if you make ala gefen, so you should have to drink the 4.4. Unless you'll say you don't have to drink the whole kais, you can just drink rye. If you drink rye, you don't say ala gefen. It's in the Marzah, it's got a big mishul. A lot of ladies don't drink the whole revius, right? They go to a road revius. But then they say ala gefen. It's in the Haggadah, they have to say. It's not part of the Seder Shel Pesach ala gefen. It's just if you believe in ala gefen, you say ala gefen. If you don't drink the share, you don't say ala gefen. But anyway, these are 3 mathematical Heshbainis of Shas, all of which you should know, the ideas you should have. Not for the math of it. I think you should know for the math of it also, but at least for the halacha of it. The din of circumference being 3 times the diameter. The din of the diagonal being 1.4 of the side of the square, and it's Tzlach Kiddush, that it's not true, that the Zayis that we have today is the Zayis, it's Katnu HaBeyim, it's Katnu HaZayim, there's been some type of change, and therefore the Shinuyim are different. If you want to know which Gemara the Dibras Moshe is going on in Masechtas Gittin, you'll have to look it up. Again, it's in Paragimel or Samach Gimel. I go to Shabbos.